I think one of the biggest obstacles here is going to be describing how the art and music did nothing for me without sounding totally racist. We're going to see if we can get through that.
Adam hates Japanese people and Japanese culture. Let's go.
Dude, we'll get to it. And welcome back to another episode of the Games Gone By podcast. It is Saturday, February 16th at the time of this recording. I'm your host, Adam, and joining me today, as always, the gaming expert and enthusiast, Austin. How you feeling about this episode today?
You know, we're talking about a game that a lot of people really like that I don't know if I did like nearly as much as all those people. So I'm ready to start some controversy.
Yeah, today we're going to be taking a look at the 2006 action-adventure developed by Clover Studio and published by Capcom, Okami. This game was hailed as kind of like an instant classic amongst many game reviewers at the time when it launched. I know EGM gave it like a 9.5 and a 10 and a 10 or something, just really, really high scores. It was modeled after Legend of Zelda. The director, I'm not even going to try on that one.
Hideki Kamiya eventually went on to make Bayonetta,
Okay.
Nier Automata, like the head of Platinum Games, pretty influential force in the industry. And this was kind of his like launching pad.
I see. So I'm the one not in the know here. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Well,
100%. Rely on the gaming expert, you know?
You're right. I'm a fool. But he basically admits like that this was heavily inspired by Legend of Zelda because it's one of his favorite series. It is a game that gets a lot of comparison to the 3D Zeldas for sure. And I can see why that comparison is made. But man, it feels like comparing what's a good analogy here? Like O'Doul's with a nice craft beer. It's like, yeah, technically they're the same thing, but also not at all.
100%. Like, I definitely see the inspiration from Zelda. Like, it makes sense, but to me, this is an inferior version of Zelda in basically every single way. And Zelda is probably my favorite franchise. I mean, Ocarina of Time is probably my favorite game of all time. But, so it's like, it's not maybe 100% fair to make that comparison. But that's what everybody else does. That's what Kamiya did. Like, if everybody else is going to make it, then so can I. And I don't think it holds a candle to those games, in my opinion.
You know, I'm with you. It is a high bar and perhaps an unfair one, but since we're not the ones that set it up, we're going to roll with it. So the game follows a storyline that really brings in a lot of Japanese mythos, right? So you are Amaterasu, the sun god.
Amaterasu, I think?
Yeah, we're going to go with that, your pronunciation. I'm going to go with Ami from here on out because that's what she is called in the game, and that is way easier. But you are like the god of sun, and you defeated some evil creature 100 years ago, but now you have some sort of amnesia because this is the only way we know how to start games in which you get powers in the early 2000s. You have to get all your powers back. And, you know, it's very much like an open world, or not open world, but kind of hub zone-based thing like an Ocarina of Time. So you start off in your starting village and you get a little bit of an intro and you get out of there. One of the things about this game, though, is that, like, despite the art style just being beautiful from the very beginning as far as the environments and the architecture and everything, and I think Ami herself, too, looks pretty cool, I found a lot of the characters, like, that was one of the first things I noticed about the game booting it up, is the characters just looked dumb and I didn't care about them because they have this weird art style where, like, none of them have faces or, like, only half of a face. Like, Waka just has eyes and, like, I think, like, there's a giant nose on Mr. Orange, but he doesn't have eyes. And it's very much reminiscent of some of these old Japanese style artwork, but to me, it just, like, it was one of the first things I noticed. It was like an instant barrier between me and kind of getting into this game. How do you feel about sort of the way the game presents itself early on in that art style?
Yeah, one of the things that this game I think is most known about whenever people talk about it is kind of its cell shading and its art style and all the like loving attention to detail to like Japanese culture and all the things that it brings in that are supposed to like create this aesthetic and this vibe that people really love. And I think for the most part it works. I would agree with you. The characters, like their faces, are stupid looking. It's clearly very intentional, but it does put you in a position where it's like, I don't care about any of these characters because I can't relate to them because I can't see their facial expressions. Like,
you can't make a read on any of them, really, or their emotions.
Right. And maybe that's a limitation of the times, but I mean, you were talking about Ocarina of Time. We're going to make this comparison a bunch, I bet. But, like, the facial expressions in that game that came out, 10 years earlier were way better than the facial expressions in this game, because it's clearly a choice to do it this way, and I think it doesn't work.
There is a game called Skies of Arcadia that came out 6 years before this on a weaker console. And let me tell you, the facial expressions in that game have really not been matched until like the last generation of consoles here. I mean, truly just a work of art and how much emotion is conveyed in those. And I don't know why this game decided to just completely go away from that entirely. They don't really on Amy. Like, she definitely has some facial expressions that you'll see a lot, but really like no other character in the game.
Yeah, I think Amy is definitely one of the most enjoyable characters in the game. And she doesn't speak at all, which is, you know, maybe there's a reason that she's one of the most enjoyable. Yeah. But they really do a lot with her facial expressions and like the texturing and just her mannerisms. Like, you really get to see a full range of emotion from that character, but you really don't see it in any of the other characters. And I do think the art style works really well for the environments, kind of like you were saying. Like, whenever you like cleanse an environment, because like part of the game is like cleansing these environments is very much like an environmental message of like defeating the evil, and it brings back the, you know, purity to the land or whatever.
Right.
And in these scenes, it's really cool whenever like it pans out and kind of gives you a wide shot and like flowers bloom everywhere, and it looks really cool. But before you cleanse these areas, they just look really muddy and flat, and like it's hard to even like pick stuff apart. And I was not impressed in the early parts with kind of some of the darkness and some of the like murkiness of the environments. I was like, man, why is everybody hyping up this art style so much?
Yeah, I don't want to be too negative, but like all of the game's flaws really do just take center stage through its first 8 hours. And I mean, they just all come together to make like what I thought was a pretty tedious experience, to say the least. And I don't want to stick on this early part, because whether it's like our co-host Jeff played this game for 2.5 hours and is like, I'm done. I have a friend that tried to play this a few years back, basically said the same thing. He really didn't like Isin, the little bug companion.
Isin's terrible, but...
Yeah. And then also just, after I finish this game, I do what I always do for this podcast. I start going on the webs and looking at all of these opinions from various forums and stuff. And there's a lot of people saying that the beginning of this game sucks ass. So it's definitely not just us who thought the beginning's kind of rough. And I think I do just want to kind of talk about like why might that be. We talked about how the characters are sort of hard to get into because of the art style. We talked about how a lot of the environments can kind of be muddied before you clean them. But I think another thing that really hurts this game is just the length of what feels like the intro. Like, imagine Ocarina of Time, but Deku Village is like 12 hours. That's kind of what this game feels like. And instead of having like a really defining dungeon that you go through to really get a feel for how this game is going to work, it kind of just breadcrumbs you along with a little power here and there, a new brush technique that may or may not be able to be used in combat. It's confusing because there's one called Bloom that is technically 3 different things in one, because it's like the spikes you can pump out of the ground, the clovers you can circle, and then also like the trees you can rescue. But all of that's like the same power, and it's just kind of strange at first. I think it's not clear where to go. There's like map markers later on in the game that are just totally absent from the first 10 hours. The environments all kind of look the same. There's sometimes where you literally just have to talk to every character in the village until something triggers, despite the fact that none of them say anything useful about what you're trying to do. And
dude, I was stuck in that first part of the village for so long, like so much longer than I should have been, because I kept talking to people and I thought I had talked to everybody, but it turns out I guess I didn't talk to the guy who was like standing by the boulders.
Yeah.
Because I analyzed the boulders and it was like, we can't get here. Maybe we should get somebody stronger to help or whatever. So I was like, oh, that's obviously Susato. Let me just go talk to him. And I could not for the life of me figure out what to do until I finally talked to the guy by the boulders. And he's like, oh, you should go get Susato. And I was like, I know. like, why did you just let me do that?
It's like the game actually hints pretty well at what you're supposed to do, but then doesn't actually tell you that you just need to talk to this one random guy before you can do what you're supposed to do. It's very silly.
Yeah, so much of the beginning I think is just hampered by like wanting to like spoon feed you to like a ridiculous degree, but also not. Like it's such a strange balance. So much of the combat in the beginning is just the most boring and repetitive and tedious thing. Up until probably 10 hours into the game, the combat is mind-numbingly simple.
It really is, and it's just a factor of them not giving you enough to play with, right? Because you really only have the
right.
one brush stroke technique. Maybe you get Cherry Bomb kind of early, You don't have any extra weapons. You mostly just use the deflector until you get the beads. You don't get the sword, which was my favorite, until way later in the game. It's just like the enemy design is cool visually. Like, I think it's actually really cool visually because they bring in all of these traditional Japanese drawings of demons and stuff.
Yeah.
But when it actually comes to the mechanics of fighting them, it's like every third enemy in this game might be interesting, and the rest are just...
And this game is so easy. Like, I'm not usually the guy who complains about easiness in games because I'm bad at pretty much every video game I ever play. But I played through this entire game, and I think I never died once. Like, I bought the upgrades for like more, like the revive thing when you die, the, like, extra lives or whatever. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
the, like, little...
The astral pouch.
Yes, that's it, the astral pouch. I bought, like, 2 of those, and I don't think I ever used one. Like, I don't think I ever even used the first one. It never mattered. Like, I never died. I never faced a challenge. And so much of the game is just attack over and over again with your rosary beads and then power slash. And the first 8 hours, you can't even do that because you don't get rosary beads forever. Like, some of the later enemies spice up the combat a little bit, and you can start using some more of your tools. Mm-hmm. But for so much of this game, it's just so mind-numbingly boring combat-wise, and it's crazy to think that, like, Hideki Kamiya went on to make Bayonetta and Nier Automata, and these games that I think just have insane and, like, crazy, sophisticated and interesting combat systems, and Okami just has, like, none of that until maybe the last, like, 5 hours.
I guess you have to start somewhere, right? You can't say he didn't learn from his previous attempts.
That is true. But it was just really disappointing coming into this because, like, I knew Kamiya was involved, so I was like, oh man, the combat's probably going to be great here. And for so much of the game, it just was not for me.
The post-credit screen actually tells you how many times you die. And it told me I died once, and I was like, when did that happen? And I was thinking about it. I actually remember. It was like at one point, I was alt-tabbing to try to record something because there was something in this game I just thought was really funny. And I never have the sound on in this game because we'll get to that. And I didn't hear the, like, beep, 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 your hearts are almost out thing. And I just, like, died while alt-tabbing.
That's pretty much that's the biggest challenge.
That's, like, the only time I came anywhere fucking close to dying in this game because it's so easy. And that would be even if you couldn't just pause and full heal yourself whenever you wanted. It would probably still be a very easy game. But you can do that, too. So it's just an extremely easy game.
And yen is like, yen, which is your currency to buy all of your consumables that you can heal yourself. Yen is like never a concern because every battle gives you like a ridiculous amount of it. Even if you don't like, because like every battle has like a rating, mm-hmm. right? So if you do well, if you finish it quickly and don't take any damage, like you'll get even more yen. But even if you don't like ace those battles, you still get a ridiculous amount of yen, and it's like never a problem. And then you can sell all your treasures, so it's like never a problem ever.
I found that system really inconsistent too, because there'd be times where I thought like, oh man, I got my butt kicked and it took forever, and I got an S rank in both categories. And then I'd do another fight where I'm like, hey, I felt like I took them out pretty quick and only got hit once, and it was like the dead tree. I'm like, come on.
Dude, 100%. There were so many times when I was like, oh yeah, I killed that one. And then it was like, nope, you suck. I was like, what do you mean?
I think that's why my technique for every encounter just began to draw as many bombs as I could, because it just seemed like there was nothing else that was more effective, except for the very handful of times where the encounter is specifically designed where you have to like use the wind power to blow the flames out or whatever. Other than that, it was just like bombs away.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really the best strategy throughout most of the game. And I sometimes found the bombs hard to like time correctly with certain enemies. Mm-hmm. I mean, certain ones it's easy. You just drop them and they'll just run into them like idiots. Yeah. But sometimes like the ones that would like burrow into the ground and stuff, like I found it hard to sometimes like line up the timing with the bombs. But even if you're not using bombs, I mean, your rosary beads, like the maxed out rosary beads, will just tear everything apart anyway. So,
especially if they're your sub weapon, you can just shoot them from a range. And it's so stupid how much damage those do later in the game.
Yeah.
I really do feel like some of the mechanics were designed for like, if you actually find this combat somehow too hard, here, this will make it even easier. It's strange. It's a weird thing because I do have these memories of stuff from back then just being like kind of hard. And they were hard because they expected you to put a bunch of time into it. And we didn't really have all of these like sophisticated design philosophies for video games. And games were just kind of hard because they were brutal and didn't have enough save points and stuff. I don't know how, but this game is just so fucking easy.
Yeah, I was honestly really shocked by how easy it was because normally I find games to be rather difficult, or at least mildly challenging, right? But this game was one of the few times where I was like, man, I wish this was a little bit harder. like I want to have a little bit more of a challenge throughout this. And I do think a lot of that just comes down to the simplicity of the combat, though. Like, so many of the fights are just repetitive, like attack, power slash, attack. Especially in the early hours, that's literally all you do. That's all you can do. It gives you no other options for like 8 hours.
It's we'll move out of talking about the intro in a minute here, but there's still just a few things to harp on because I feel like the things I hate about the first 10 hours, they are like lesser in the back 2/3 of the game, but they're still there, and they kind of just continue to cast like a dark cloud over so much of it.
Yes.
This game alternates between like dialogue where you can kind of press down a button to just have it instantly finished. You kind of read it at your own pace. And then ones that I guess are supposed to be the more cinematic moments, and the dialogue comes across the screen at just a snail's pace. Just painfully slow.
It's so bad. It was one of the first notes I took while playing this game. It was like, why is this text crawl so slow?
And it's all like I would say 70% of the slow crawl dialogue is in the first 3 hours.
And it's crazy because there's some dialogue that you can skip and other dialogue that you can't. And I'm like, why not just make it all skippable?
So it got to a point where I just started skipping the entire scenes because I didn't want to sit there and let it play out in front of me. Like, I'm sorry, I read so much faster than it was giving me, and it was making me impatient. And I wanted to read it. I just wanted to read it at my own pace. And I can't stand when games like don't let me do that.
Yeah, well, and it's extra weird because like it's not voice acted. Well, it's not technically
it's Banjo-Kazooie voice acting.
Every character like has some weird, stupid sound effect that goes with. Issen's definitely being the most annoying one.
It's strange to me because as a kid I played Banjo-Kazooie, right? And I don't know if I was a kid or I just didn't mind that, or maybe they do it better than this game. But for some reason, that me stuff in this game just absolutely killed me. I turned that off in like the first hour and never turned it back on.
Well, I also think it's maybe like a tone thing. Like Banjo-Kazooie is obviously a very goofy game. It's very lighthearted. Like you play as a freaking bear with a bird in his backpack. Like the game is goofy. I think this game wants to be taken very seriously and like be very dramatic. And there are definitely funny moments. Like it's not like the game is completely bereft of comedy.
Right.
But I think for the most part the game wants to be taken seriously. So whenever you just hear over and over again, it's just like makes me want to gouge my eyes out. Or I guess really like jam something in my ears.
Like, you may be right about that. Honestly, that was something that I could never get a feel for most of this game at exactly how serious it wanted to be. There's obviously times where you're like, yes, this game is trying to be serious. But then even during that, you would just have an Issen moment where you're like, God damn it, Issen. Like you were ruining this again, as you do every time you open your little bug mouth. Like,
yeah, like, look, I know Japan is really horny. I get it. Like, it's their thing. But sometimes this game is like, Issen, please stop. Like, you're like, stop talking about the huge boobs on the priestess. Like, this bit wasn't funny in 2006, and it's definitely not funny in 2025.
And there was another thing that after the first 6-8 hours, he kind of stops doing that until like toward the end, where you meet a couple more busty babes, as he calls them.
Busty, literally, it's what he calls them.
But there was really like again a situation where so much of this was just front loaded in the beginning, and it's like, are you basically trying to inoculate people to the worst parts of your game? It's like, man, if they can make it through the first 5 hours, they'll love the rest of it. I can't imagine there's anything intentional going on here with like, oh yeah, we were trying to make the beginning more arduous or slower or something. It just turned out that way, and it's so noticeable.
Well, and there's just so many points in this game that have like game design that definitely feels very reminiscent of 2006, but not in a way that is like fun to play in 2025 in any way. Like, run through the village and circle every tree, but this game's mechanics don't let you really circle things correctly. So like, good luck blooming every tree in this stupid village. Like, stuff like that is like, why? Like, I don't want to do that. There's no fun or engaging element of that piece of gameplay.
Did you ever circle a tree after that part? Because I didn't.
I did because I needed to get those stupid things to upgrade, and then I realized that I never actually needed any of them. So
we can maybe talk about that a little bit. There's all of these progression systems in the game that I felt like you could just so easily ignore 90% of them, and not only could you, but you should, because they actually, to get those currencies is just a arduous, awful, miserable experience, waste of time. Like, I truly did not want to feed a goddamn animal ever again.
the demon fangs are awful. Like, apparently you informed me that half of them are tied behind mini games on the loading screens that are turned off by default, which I didn't know until you explained to me after I beat the game. And I'm like, why is that a choice that you would make?
So in the original game, the loading screens had these sort of like, almost like rhythm games built into them. There's those little paws that go across the bottom. And if you hit a button in time with them, they would turn into like a flower. And if you got all of them, you'd get a demon fang. I think is how it worked.
Okay.
I turned them on for a little while, and I couldn't really get it to work right. And then I just turned them off, because what would happen is you would have to hit like start or select or whatever to actually go past the loading screen. So I was like, oh, wait, am I just putting in more barriers into like progressing this game? I'm not doing this. But then they also come up in other little ways that maybe the game like mentions offhand in the first couple hours. It's possible, but I certainly didn't remember it. Anytime you deflect an attack with, well, it's not like any time, it's like once per enemy you deflect an attack with the deflector sub-weapon, you'll get a demon fang. Cutting the enemies in half when they go into the little slow-mo thing at the end like gets you a demon fang. I can't remember, there was like a third way or fourth way, but not only are these fangs kind of hard to come by, because I didn't use the reflector after a certain point. Like we said, the other two weapons were just better.
Yep.
I didn't know about the minigame thing until I read it at like hour 28. I found that the cutting people in half at the end just became harder and harder throughout the game. Toward the end of it, I just never got it to work right. I kept visiting the Emperor, and I never had enough fangs to buy anything. And it wasn't right. Easy to visit the damn Emperor, because they put him in the most hard to navigate city, way in the corner, so far out of the way from anything that you will do after visiting him the first time. Oh man, I'm getting mad again just talking about it.
And I think one of the core things about this game that we have kind of glanced around and briefly mentioned, but it's the core of so much of my problems with this game, is that the main central mechanic of drawing with the paintbrush just doesn't work as well as it needs to be built entirely around, like, to be the center of your game's mechanics. It just doesn't work. Power Slash is inconsistent. Mm-hmm. Bloom is inconsistent. Everything in this game with the brush is inconsistent. Like,
it really is.
I was drawing it on my Switch. I was using the control stick. Like, I tried motion controls. No matter which way I attempted to use the paintbrush, it just didn't feel good to use.
I was playing the PC port, right? And it was the HD. We both played the HD re-release, obviously.
Yes.
But this game felt like they just took the port from 2006. I don't even know if there was one, but it felt like they took a PC port from 2006, made it widescreen, and called it a day. Like, all of the controls, remember like a few months ago I was playing like Ultima 4 from like 1983 or whatever? So obviously there's no mouse in that game, right? There's no mouse controls in PC games way back then. That's what playing this game fucking felt like, because you couldn't use the mouse in any of the menus, dude. You had to navigate with WASD and pressing enter. And I was like, oh my God, it's the 80s. And then like the amount of times I had to try to hit exit options, and instead I hit exit to menu, and I lost all this progress because there's just like a giant button that quits the game right next to the one that leaves the options menu. And like, what are we doing here? It's a PC game. I'll just fucking Alt F for you. Don't even give me an exit button. Like, I don't need this. But I don't know, man. The PC port issue for me was so intense the first few hours. I eventually kind of got over this by deciding, like, so I went through, I remapped almost every default control in the game to keyboard. The map was V, dude. V. Walking, there's a sneak that like you never really have to. I think it literally comes into play like once or twice, but that's mapped to a button.
Yeah, like literally one time.
I imagine on like a controller, you just barely move the stick, but on PC they need an extra button. So it's B because nah. And so eventually it's like after readjusting all the sensitivities on both controller and mouse, after remapping every button, after realizing that the mouse was better at, or the controller was better at some things and the keyboard and mouse were better at other things, it's like I finally got to a point where I could 80% of the time get the brush to do what I wanted it to do. And that was probably the best I ever got.
Yeah, and that to me, and yeah, like I would agree that at some point I got the hang of it and I started to understand, like, okay, I have to make this motion or it will not work. And thankfully, most of the brushstrokes are pretty simple. You don't have to do anything complicated. Most of it is like either a straight line, a circle, 3 lines, like a loop-de-loop, or like whatever, right? A half moon. Like, most of the brushstrokes are easy to draw and replicate, which is important, but the game just doesn't respond to them half the time. Like, you draw that shape and the game's like, don't know what you just did. It's like, what do you mean? That is a line. That is a circle. Like,
it's a horizontal line straight through this tree or this enemy. There's nothing else it could be. It's just, you really have to be way too precise, especially for some of these, what is it, like, they're not really so much mini games as they are like cinematic drawing sequences. So it's like when you fight a Orochi, one of the 3 times you have to fight him, he Sasuo or whatever like slashes the heads, and you have to follow those up with these slashes. And it's like, I kept thinking, am I trying to put it over his head or this weird symbol they're overlaying over his head? Oh, I've waited too long to do it. Gotta do them all over. The little canoe streaming down the river, we have to draw. All of those I could not stand because they required super tight inputs on a time limit. And the, especially with the Sasuno slashing thing, if you missed one, you had to start all over. And this wasn't just like, oh, let me quickly go back to the first one. No, you got to hear stupid dialogue again. It seems like, what are you doing, Amy? Draw the slashes. And brother, oh my God, dude. I just, those sequences were absolutely terrible. I could not stand them. They never got good. They never got anything less than terrible. Even when I finally got good at using some of the strokes for like combat and for general puzzling, the like extended drawing sequences just sucked till the very end.
Yeah, they're always terrible, and I can't even imagine, like I said, I was using the Switch to draw like on the screen, and I've heard some complaints with the HD port that some of those like drawing on the Switch is a little inconsistent compared to using the controller, which like doesn't make any sense to me. You would think actually drawing the lines would be more consistent, but that, I mean, it could be a port problem, but I can't imagine doing this back on like the PS2 and like having to click R, hold it down, draw with the stick for every single time you had to do this. There's no way I would have finished this game, dude. There's just no way.
It was really annoying on keyboard because you have to, so like getting the right angle to draw stuff was often hard. And while you've like had time pause, you can kind of use WASD to swivel the camera around a little bit, but you're also holding like another button that whole time with that hand, because you're not holding a button on the mouse, right?
Right.
So trying to use your hand to keep control held, or R, like as I eventually remapped it to, while also hitting WASD to spin the camera. And it's just like, half the difficulty with the drawing was getting the camera to line up in a position to where you could actually see the lightning bolt or the tree or whatever the hell you were drawing from. And then from there, you'd finally draw it and it didn't work, and the camera would reset. And it was just like, I lost, like, my final save file is 30 hours, and my Steam file is like 39 because I alt-tabbed in the middle of a dungeon so many times, or alt-F4'd, just out of frustration, and immediately was like, oh, God damn it, I just lost a half an hour of progress. Or it was because I booted the game up and then just walked away from my computer because I didn't actually want to play it. And I would just be like, I'll be right back. I'm just going to get coffee. 3 hours later, I haven't sat back down to play it.
And so many of these problems are, again, most prevalent in the first, 8 to 10 hours, which is way too long for a game to be this problematic. That's not me defending it.
Right.
This game should not be that bad for that long. But I will say, after... There's a very clear, young Link to adult Link moment in the game when you fight Orochi for the first time. Mm-hmm. It very much feels like, okay, we're going into the second phase of this game. Now, this is... We cleared the first part. We cleared the young Link part. Now we're going into the adult Link part, right? And it does get so much substantially better after that, I think.
It does. In fact, you can sort of divide this game into 3 10-hour arcs, roughly. Each one ending with a beautiful Orochi fight, right? And yeah, we'll get to him later. God, we'll get to Orochi later. But I think if the first arc was anything like the last two, this game would be better. And I think we might have a different opinion about the third one in particular. But I really thought that once you get into that adult Link stage, so to speak, the game does start to pick up a lot. And then I think I thought the third act was great. That sorry excuse for a boss rush aside at the very end. I really enjoyed the third act. I remember thinking, my God, if the first 20 hours of this game were anything like the last 10, I think I would love it, but they're not. And particularly the first hour, right? Because it's like you don't have your fast travel yet. You don't have very many brush powers yet. You only have one of the 3 weapon types. You don't have, the extra currency with Demon Fang like vendor yet, so you might not even realize that they're important to get if you even know how to get them. There's just so much like, there's the dodge, the double jump, these other little things you unlock throughout the game. You just don't have like any of this in the beginning, and it hurts. It just hurts the experience of the game. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, it really does. It puts you in kind of the wrong mind frame for the rest of it too. Like you're thinking about how bad the beginning is. Like it really does give you so little to work with in the first couple of hours that once you finally start to get stuff, you're like, oh my God, this is what the game should be like. But it just takes so long to get there. And I think a lot of that has to do with kind of what you mentioned early too, in that there's so little like defined dungeon or like puzzle or like combat encounters that feel very intentional in the first 10 hours. Like it just feels like so much running around and exploring and like hit a random battle in the fields and fight it in a very boring way because we have no tools, and then go through a dungeon, but the dungeon is like just run around and like do the most basic puzzle of like slash a door open or bloom this tree. Like so much of the creativity comes later in the game that the beginning is like what am I even doing here?
One of the first like you said, you can hardly even call them dungeons, but one of the first one is you like go into this cave and it's only a couple rooms and there's like an altar that's missing something, and Issen keeps saying, wow, it seems like it's missing something. And I'm like, well, okay, not 10 minutes ago, I got an ability that lets me fill in gaps of things, and things that were missing appear, like broken bridges or this and that. This must be what this is about. So I'm scribbling over this over and over. I'm changing the camera angle. I'm trying to figure out what to do. No. The closed door nearby can actually be broken open by slashing it, and there's a ball behind it, and you roll that onto the altar. And I was like, Issen, you are useless. This is the first time you've ever had to help me, and you were like anti-helpful. You weren't just not letting me know what to do. You were confusing me and leading me down the wrong route of what I was supposed to do.
Right. I've literally been given the wrong directions. Thank you, sir.
And it never gets better after that. Nothing he says after that is any more useful. Not at one point in this entire fucking game does the character that's supposed to guide you through it say anything remotely helpful, dude.
It feels almost like the beginning of this game tries to take a kind of like a Majora's Mask approach, because the first dungeon of Majora's Mask comes pretty deep into it, but so much of Majora's Mask is interesting for reasons outside of the dungeons, and this game just does not have that same type of hook. Like, the most exciting parts of this game are in fact its dungeons, I think, but there's only like 3 or 4 of them that you could even define as a true dungeon, and it doesn't come until like 20 hours into the game.
I say all the things that feel like a really well done, like confined dungeon space are all at least 15 hours in, maybe more. Yeah, they're nowhere near the start of the game.
Like Moon Cave is kind of one, which is at like the 10-hour mark, but the first one that really felt distinct to me was the Ghost Ship.
Yes, I would
which is like 15-ish hours in, maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah, that's deep into the second act for sure.
Right, and that's the first time that I felt like I was in like a defined dungeon. And I'm like, oh man, okay, there's like puzzles that have to do with things that I just learned in this dungeon or right before it. Like, I'm doing things tied to a theme. Like, all these ideas and concepts that Zelda's been using since Link to the Past. And this game can't get until 20 hours in.
There's like the night and dark system, or the morning and night system, kind of like a Majora's Mask, right?
Yeah,
and kind of even like in Ocarina, did it have night and day? I can't remember.
Yeah, you could change it with like there's like a sun song or something where you could bring the sun back.
So you get something kind of like that in this game, but it really just feels like they first want you to suffer, because there's this one part where they just make you wait until it turns dark, and it takes a while in this game to do that. And dude, every time it happens, it like, I don't know, maybe this was a thing that happened in Zelda and I don't remember, but it just takes control of your character away and flashes to this little panoramic across the skyline as it turns darker night every single time that it turns darker night, regardless of what you were in the middle of doing. And that annoyed the shit out of me. especially during moments where I'm like already kind of frustrated. I'm like, okay, where the camera's annoying me, these enemies are annoying me, where am I supposed to go? I think I found it. It's dark. Alt F4, I'll come back.
And one of the things that makes that so frustrating is that it feels like this game wants you to do things that would be really useful if you had tools that they're going to give you right after doing them.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you go find all the dogs, there's a moment in this game where like there's a bunch of missing dogs that you have to go find. And you have to like hunt them all over the map. And right after you do that, they give you fast travel.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Or like with the night and day thing, there's like puzzles you have to solve later by drawing a moon in the sky or whatever. But I don't think there's ever another moment where you have to wait for a specific part of day after they give you the ability to change it.
Except for maybe the... well, actually getting into the ghost ship, I think. Or no, getting into the water palace or whatever, I think you need to turn at night.
Okay, yeah. You
so
might
like
know about that.
maybe one time in this entire game that you use that night power to actually like progress something in the story, if you will.
Yeah, it's just really not a mechanic that's actually that relevant most of the time. You know, in Zelda, I remember you go across the fields at night and there's like the weird zombie enemy. So maybe you'd be incentivized to turn it to daytime so you don't have to deal with that. There were certain characters and certain things you could only do at night or in the daytime. This game doesn't really have that. It just has a period of the day that makes it hard to see and hard to navigate the world. And it seems to be the only thing nighttime accomplishes in this game.
100%. So much of this game feels like it's like you're taking ideas from better games and then just like not utilizing them correctly. And I hate to say that because I know how loved this game is. Like I know that people really are drawn to this game, but so much of it just doesn't work for me. Except for that like middle chunk, the ghost ship, Oni Island. The Oni Island dungeon, I think, is genuinely fantastic.
Oni Island is amazing. It's so much fun.
Like,
and it makes you wonder if it's like they put a team in a corner to just make Oni Island the entire dev cycle, and everyone else fucked around on the rest of the game.
Like, Oni Island has probably the best character in the game. I mean, he's a piece of paper, but he's awesome. I love Toby.
Somehow the person with the least amount of face is actually the best character in this game. But
It actually makes a lot of sense though when you look at the art style. But like I love Toby. I love the challenges that are in there, like the little like platforming sections, and I think a lot of the combat encounters in that dungeon are fun. Like the theming of it is fun. The, like Demon Island, all of that stuff is really enjoyable. I remember going through that very quickly and being like, man, this is fun. I was glued to my Switch. And I just didn't feel that in so many other parts of the games, which is just really unfortunate.
yeah, you know, one thing that this game could have done more of, and I think it tries to do a lot of it, it's just a lot of it isn't very well done, though, is these platforming segments. Because, you know, Ocarina of Time, like, it has puzzles, but you can't jump, you can't really sprint, it doesn't really have the same, like, mechanics to let you do, like, intense platforming type situations. This game has those. And outside of Oni Island and maybe a few other segments, it just seems like they don't realize that that's actually one of the strengths of their game.
For sure. It's like, here's these really, actually pretty fluid, like, movement mechanics, and we're not going to utilize them except for one dungeon, and then we're going to use them in the ice dungeon when nothing feels right because you're running on ice. Like,
man, so I know you hated that dungeon at the end.
Dude, I hate that dungeon. It brought, I was on a high. Like, I started off not liking the game, like we talked about at length. I went on a high for the second part, and then that last dungeon showed up, and I just descended into hatred again.
I feel like we're being a little rambly with this, but part of that is because this game lacks, like, definition in so many places and, like, defined boundaries and cutoffs and stuff. Like, we already talked about how it's very hard to determine what's a dungeon in the first half of the game. It's very hard to keep up with what this game's doing in the narrative after the first half of the game. Suddenly you go back in time 100 years, and there's like Amoretsu or Ami is being called something else in 1,000 years in the past or 100 years because they think it's actually
Shiranui or something like a
because they think it's a demon slave to Orochi or whatever. They think they're like working in tandem. I have no idea what was going on here. I'm not going to pretend that I was closely paying attention to the dialogue at this point, but that just, I never understood what happened there, especially because do we ever seem to like go back to the right time or are we suddenly just there? Like, I can't even remember how that part worked.
No, so I think we go back in time to relive the Orochi fight from 100 years ago. That's when we fight Orochi the second time, where Ami is supposed to be Shiranui or something, which I think is just like a previous incarnation of Amaterasu.
Okay.
I think that it is Amaterasu. It's just like an earlier version of her, and we see the ancestor of Susanoo, whose name I can't remember, but
it's like Nagi, right?
Yes. He's like the legendary warrior that Susanoo is descended from. He looks exactly the same. And all these story beats play out exactly like the thing that we were told in the beginning. We just get to like relive the legend of the first like defeat of Orochi. But I don't know why. Like I still, after beating the game, and you know, I'm sure somebody listening to this like loves Okami and loves the lore, and they'll tell me all about why. But I just didn't get it in the game. I was like, why did we go back to do this? Because the only thing that pays off is we do go back to the present time, but then somehow like Shiranui, or the previous version of Okami, of Amaterasu, shows up in the present somehow and helps you fight those like two bird guys in Oni Island. Like, I don't know how she comes forward in time. I don't know how that works, and I don't know why that happens, because it was never really clear. It was just to help you fight the bird things, but I'm like, why did we need that?
I think the bird things are actually in the shrine, right? Because isn't Ninetales at the end of Oni Island?
Yes, sorry. I meant the shrine, if I didn't say the shrine. Yes, the birds are at the end of the shrine, and that's when Shiranui like comes back to help.
That's right.
Or Shiranui, whatever. And I just don't know why that happens. I don't know what we gain from that. I don't know. Maybe it helps. Maybe Shiranui like helps clear the mind of our friend who's like going insane. The like bandit guy. I can't remember his name either.
In a lot of media, time travel is used as this very gimmicky thing to solve a problem, and it's really contrived. I don't know what problem was being solved with this one. Like, I don't even know the first step of its contrivances. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it would have worked better as just like a flashback, like a dream sequence or something that Ami had. Like, this thing could have maybe worked to see what happened in the legend, or maybe like the legend is like the tutorial or something. Like, there's a way to incorporate this legend of Orochi and like what happened previously, but the way they do it just doesn't make any sense to me.
And it's all made worse, dude, by the fact that like, okay, I'll rant about Orochi here. It's time. So
yeah, we can say it now. This is the worst boss fight in the game for me.
When we first fight him, it's like, it's fine, okay? But it's probably the longest boss fight in the game outside of the last boss. It's like an 8-headed dragon, and what you have to do is, you know, one of the busty babes has brought her magical sake and fills up a well around him. And you go to each head, and after it does, like, some type of attack that you kind of, you know, dodge or whatever, and then opens its mouth to scream, you use your new little water spout spell to shoot the sake into its mouth, and it kind of stuns it, but you have to do each head twice, and it's not super clear that you have to do each head twice. You also only have to do 3 of the 8 heads to break the first phase. I'm pretty sure you and I both went around the entire fucking circle thinking, I'm going to hit one and then I'll move on to the next one. But you don't have to. You only have to hit 3.
Well, and also you have to hit them twice, which I know you mentioned, but there's like no indication that you have to hit them twice. There's literally a visual indicator that the head changes. Like, it's like, okay, I've done my task. I've damaged the head. Let's move on to the next one. But you don't have to do that. You have to hit them twice. It's insane.
This game cannot decide whether the visual indicator for someone being injured is them laying down, them turning to stone, or them having stars flying around their head. And it just kind of fucking decides at random what it is. So, yes, when you hit them twice, it gets the star around their head. But like you said, they like change color after the first one. So you figure like, I've hit them. I'm moving on to the next head. Nope. So you get to you knock him down, you climb up one of his heads, you destroy this bell thing in the middle. Then you get to the second phase, which is you have to run around and basically do the same thing to every single head. But after you do it, it falls to the ground and then you can hit it, right? So you destroy the heads. Not hard, but takes a very long time. Not my favorite fight,
tedious.
But after the first time, it was like, okay, it's fine. You have to fight him again, as we mentioned. And dear listener, when I say nothing about the encounter has changed, I do mean literally nothing. There's nothing about the encounter that changes, down to the point where at the very end, it's not Susanoo, it's Nagi, but you still have to do the stupid cinematic slash sequence across all 8 heads, and then he chops the final one directly in half on his own, and it is identical to the first fight.
Literally the exact same fight, not changed in any way, shape, or form.
And then, if that isn't bad enough, at the end of the game, there is this like sad excuse for a boss rush segment before the final boss, where there's like these 5 portals, and you go in each one and you fight a previous boss. Now, they're all exactly the same as the first time you fought them.
Exactly.
Which means you have now fought Orochi 3 times, the most long and tedious boss fight in this game 3 times with 0 changes between them. You also get to do a full heal between each of these, so it's not as if there's some sort of challenge of fighting them all in a row. It is literally just repeating content you've already done to waste an hour of your time before the final boss. It's not fun, it's not challenging, it's not interesting, it's not fresh, it sucks. I hated it.
The best part of this is that there are bosses in the game that are left out of this boss rush.
Yeah.
They don't make you fight every single boss, but they do make you fight Orochi, the boss you've already fought again.
I really liked the 2 birds that you fight at the end of the shrine. But I guess they decided since you just fought them, they won't make you fight them again. I would rather fought those 2 birds again 5 times than had to fight Orochi for a 3rd time. Truly awful.
It's just, and nothing about this fight is like hard. No. Like you said, nothing about this fight is difficult. It's probably one of the easiest boss fights in the game. It just takes forever. Like the visual indicator is so unclear, and the tediousness of it is just infuriating.
It's one of those bosses in the boss rush I beat in like 20 seconds, dude. It was like I dodged their first attack and I drew a bunch of bombs and he was dead. Beautiful. Orochi takes like 15 minutes at least.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And again, like we've been complaining almost for an hour about this game, and I understand, like, we both had a lot to hate about it. There are some genuinely fun moments in this game. Again, Oni Island is awesome. Yeah. The ghost ship is pretty cool. Some of the combat gets better late in the game, but the true enemy that we haven't spoken about is this game's freaking camera is miserable. We're going to keep complaining because this game's camera is awful.
There's times where it's like, I know exactly what I have to do. I have to draw a line from this lightning bolt to this like thing, but I can't get the camera to show me both in the same shot. And then when I unpause it, they like reposition and I'm back at square one. It's just, oh God.
And when you draw it, like, you think you get it right on there, but it's like you were just a little bit off, so it doesn't actually register that you went from the thing to the thing you're supposed to. So you have to do it all over again anyway, and then fight the camera again. It's so irritating. For me, the part where the camera reared its head the most, I think, was with the spiders in the last dungeon, like the Waku Shrine or whatever. Like, climbing up those spiders was so irritating to, like, get the camera in the position I needed to be, then use the wind thing to, like, get the fire off the spiders, or what, like, I can't even remember the full details of how all that progressed.
Using ice to freeze them, but yeah.
That's right, ice, yes. Using the ice to freeze them, and then, like, angling, climbing onto them, but then you better do it fast because the ice doesn't last that long, and you have to fight the camera the whole time to get there. God, it was so frustrating. Like, trying to position the camera in the right way was infuriating.
You also frequently have to do those spiders in exactly the right spot, because if you do it, like, too early before they start moving again, they're not close enough.
Oh, my God,
and if you do it too late, they're too far. Like, it's just so silly. What I hate about that, dude, is there's a whole segment in this game where you have to crawl through lava, so you do this thing to get an item you equip that literally says protects you from fire damage. And then like 6 hours later, they're just like, oh yeah, there's these spiders that are on fire, so you can't climb on top of them. It's like, why? You made a big deal about me swimming through lava earlier. I'm protected from fire.
I can literally go through lava.
It's not a big deal because ultimately it's just a mechanic. But like, since it's just a mechanic, it could have been anything else.
Right. It's and then so much of that ice dungeon. I know you had some like I think a lot of the puzzles in this game are either really boring and like not all that complicated, just like too weird and obtuse for me. Like some of them I think are fine. There's a couple puzzles that I actually genuinely enjoyed, mostly centered around like Oni Island, the ghost ship, like those dungeons that I keep going back to, like inside the Emperor and like the Emperor's Palace and stuff, I think there's some decent puzzles in that section. But I did not really like the puzzles in the shrine.
I'm surprised you had so much trouble with those. I really liked the puzzles at the end of the shrine there. But the whole thing is a little dampened by the fact that it's an ice level in a 3D adventure game, and so it sucks.
Also true, yes.
The slippery floor shit is annoying enough, but it's kind of, I kind of expected that. That's pretty common in these types of games. What I did not care for is like every time you touch one of these little ice pillars that are standing up, or these rolling snowballs are throwing at you, it freezes you in this block of ice. And dude, it must last 3-4 seconds. It feels like eternity, and it happens constantly. Yeah. I mean, constantly.
And it's like, it doesn't hurt. It's not really a major, like, penalty. It's just time consuming, which just makes it tedious.
It is really like an encapsulation of this game, really. Because it's like,
really
this wasn't hard. This wasn't fun. All this did was just delay me getting to what I'm trying to do without any real justification for doing so.
Yeah, I really wish that this game could have just been, like, the middle 10 hours and, like, just, like, been like that for the rest of it, because I really liked that part.
Imagine just like 5 Oni Island type things that you just went between.
God, just like really well intentioned, like strong design, really strong theming, and like cohesive vision, and do that instead of all the like weird stuff at the beginning. Like when I think back to the best of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Link to the Past, like Wind Waker, like. So many distinct and like memorable dungeons or set pieces or like things throughout. I mean, every dungeon in Ocarina is super memorable to me. And so few of them here are. Like there's only 2 or 3 that really leave an impression. And one of them leaves a negative impression for me. Like it's really frustrating.
It's very strange. Especially when you think like, it's maybe just because there's no like themes tying them together. Because with Ocarina, everything is like an element in the back half, and in the first half, it's kind of tied between like water, fire, and earth with the different environments. And I think that lends a lot to them being memorable. I mean, I have these memories of like the lava. I have these memories of fat squid guy taking forever to get out of your way. And yeah, so whereas this, it's just like I don't know that there were any real themes that could be pulled out for these beginning dungeons. Like the ghost ship is really the first one where I feel like, oh yeah, it's a ghost ship. Like that's pretty self-explanatory, right? We understand the theme of ghost ship. Right. But before that, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you what the like philosophy artistically or mechanically or narratively was for any of these opening dungeons.
Yeah, that's 100% its biggest problem. Like, and Zelda, and I know Okami's a different game. Like, I understand that it's not trying to do the exact same thing, but so much of what makes Zelda dungeons memorable is, like, going through the dungeon, using the tools that you already have, but then getting a new tool in the dungeon that dramatically changes the way that you interact with the rest of it. It's the thing that people were missing from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, like having that very cohesive vision of get an item and I'll solve puzzles using what you already have, but now use this new item to explore parts of the dungeon that you couldn't have done yet or that require like new and creative thinking. And Okami just lacks this in so many parts of the game because it doesn't give you new tools tied to your dungeons.
Yeah, the brushes are like the techniques are fun, and I can see where in some ways I can see that we're even superior, right? You don't have to go dig through menus. You can assign more than 3 at a time, yada, yada. But ultimately just...
Yeah, totally.
The way they're... So it's like, it's right to be a better system than Zelda's tools, and yet it falls flat. The way that you actually end up using them, not compelling, not frequent enough. Like there's some times, for sure, that are fun, right? Like
Oh, definitely.
When you first get the thing that you draw from the flower to you and it yanks you up, it kind of just introduces a whole new level of like verticality to the dungeons, and you can like zip from place to place, a little easier. But then even then, the boss of that dungeon is just so excruciating because it's like this giant spider that has these hooks on its butt, and you're trying to draw the vines from the flowers to the hooks. And this to me was the game's lowest point as far as like registering what I think I'm doing.
Oh my god!
You only have to draw 4 of them, and I would only get 3, and then he'd spin out of them because the 4th one, I don't know, I draw it 6 times and it didn't connect. Like,
and then you have to do that fight again too in the boss rush. Dude, I almost threw my Switch because I could not get it to register correctly in that second fight, and I'm like, why? Like, I did this fight already. I know how to do this. This is not challenging, but your game won't register what I'm doing. Yeah. And like, I think that's probably my biggest frustration with the brush system is, like you said, I think there's a lot of great moments that could be pulled from this. I do think a lot of the brushstrokes are interesting and could lead to interesting puzzle solving. I think like drawing from the lightning is cool, like electrifying certain items and things like that. But just so much of it doesn't register correctly that it makes it feel more frustrating than ever exciting or interesting.
You know, another thing I think Ocarina of Time does so well is that these tools they're not just combat abilities and they're not just puzzle like keys. They're both. They're always both. This game, like they can be both, but especially the last 3 you get are all like the 3 elements, and there's not actually elements in most of the fights.
Yes. Oh my God,
you can freeze something with the freeze thing, but you might only encounter 2 fights in this game that have a block of ice to do that. And the same with fire, and same with lightning.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. That's one of the most frustrating parts, and I think I even made a note about it, is like, there's so many brushstrokes that could make fighting so much more engaging or more puzzle-based or any of those things, but they just don't give you the tools to do it. You have the brushstroke, but the element never appears. So, like, only in very specific fights to introduce the idea. And it's like, okay, cool, that's a great idea. And then it never comes back up.
And I think part of that is this game does this thing where it reminds me of kind of like Chrono Trigger, where you see the enemies on the map, and then you run into them, and it like goes to a combat screen, right? But the problem with this game is I think other than boss fights, it's always the same arena with the weird glowing walls in a tight circle, and it truly makes every encounter just feel so samey.
For sure.
Even when the enemy design is pretty cool, you're always fighting in this tight little arena that feels like the same thing you did at hour 1 as you're doing at hour 30. The boss fights are the only real deviation from that. And those little arenas just might randomly have a fire or a lightning or an ice thing, but they're much more likely to just not.
And there are a couple cool enemies that like I remember the one that like throws out the skull at you first and then like does the slash attack, and like you can slash that skull and stun it, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. The game never tells you that though. You just kind of have to like stumble into it or like just hope you figure it out. That made a lot of the fights frustrating because I wouldn't do that. I would just like do something else because I didn't know to do that.
So I think...
And then I'd stumble upon it and be like, oh man, perfect.
You're sort of supposed to pick up on that because from the trees early in the game that throw things, and it shows you that you have to slash their little coconuts to send them back at them.
Yeah. And I could get that. And I could get like where the game would want me to do that. And I guess, right, blame me for not figuring it out. But I just felt like it was a little too obtuse sometimes of what they wanted you to do to make the enemies easier to kill. Especially when you didn't really have to do it.
Yeah.
You could just like dodge around until they opened up and then
see that was my problem, is that like sometimes I would identify the weakness, but I was like, yeah, but is it better than just drawing a bomb on them and hitting them with a charged up sword attack?
Yeah.
No, it's probably not, because it never is. Because there's nothing in this game more damaging than like a fully charged up sword attack while you're drawing bombs with all of your ink. I mean, there's just no better way to kill anything.
Yeah. Playing through this, at first I was like, man, I do not like this at all. And I think I came away with it a lot more positive than I was in the beginning. And I can see a lot of potential for Okami 2, which is like the primary reason that I suggested this episode and wanted to do this episode anyway, is because Okami 2 was recently announced and there was so much hype. And I mean, Jeff Keighley literally cried at the Game Awards when it happened. Like, my man was teary-eyed announcing Okami 2. Like, he was so excited about Okami 2, and I understood why. Well, I wanted to understand why, I guess, because so much of the like cult status around Okami, everybody loves this game, and I came into this very excited, and I left a lot less excited, but I do see potential for Okami 2. I see the core of what this game is interesting, and I think if better executed through all the lessons that Kami has learned throughout the years, I'm hoping that Okami 2 is going to solve all the things that I hated about this game.
I know we keep bouncing around, and I apologize to the listeners for this, but I just want to talk about the boss rush thing again one more time, because I was thinking about this a lot last night. Like, I was, okay, so what are some games that do things like this that I really like? And my first thought was Chrono Trigger. When you fight Lavos at the end, right? He has his body in the two hands, and the two hands will change between various boss techniques throughout the game. There's a little like image that flashes on the screen of that boss, so you kind of like get a feel for who it is. But the one, it rotates between them. It's not like you just have to defeat it in like individual fights, right? And the body of Lavos never stops doing things to you too, right? So it's like, I thought it was a really interesting boss rush because it takes all of those mechanics you've had to deal with in the game and incorporates it into a new form that you fight all at once. This game literally just makes you repeat content you've already done in the exact same way. It's so, like, I hate using the word lazy when it comes to video games, especially because so much of this game isn't lazy, right? There's a lot of attention to the art and all these things, but this is lazy. Like, this boss thing at the end is just outright awful design. There's no excuse for it, and it's lazy. And the game would have been so much better if you walked onto the Ark and fought the goddamn final boss.
Yeah, it's like time padding. It's just padding for time to have more content to play, and to like delay the end game a little bit to just give you a little bit more game. But it's like, it's not good or fun game. It's just, here's more content, but it's not even more content. It's just, here's the same content again. And yeah, I agree with you on lazy. Like, it's just, it felt like something that was put in because it had to be put in, because like, oh, that's what we do with this type of game. But like, you really don't, because Zelda doesn't sit there and force you to do boss rushes at the end of every game. Like not every action game has a boss rush, but I do think like at the time that was kind of a common trope is, oh, we have a boss rush. And I know bosses are like a big staple of like 2000s gaming. So like, oh, look at all of our bosses. The problem is most of these bosses aren't that fun to fight, really. You can maybe get away with a boss rush if the bosses were more engaging, but we've already fought Orochi 2 times and it wasn't engaging the first 2. Why would it be engaging the third time?
The 3 Orochis is really just like, I could almost get over the shitty boss rush if I didn't have to fight him a third time, but it's just like, what was going through their fucking mind? Like, I would just love to be a fly on the wall during that conversation, because someone actually convinced a room full of people that a third Orochi fight was a good idea. I need that guy, like, on my team to just sell people, I don't know, like, fucking bottled air. Like, Jesus Christ.
Sell this podcast, please, like, help me market this podcast, because, man, you were really good at convincing people.
I would say we haven't really talked about the music yet, which is another thing that I think people really kind of harp on as being like one of the great parts about this game. Now, look, I'll be the first to say, I'm not like a super musically inclined person. I don't know like the history of traditional Japanese music or anything like this. I don't know what a something time signature is. But like, let me tell you what every piece of music in this game sounded like, okay? There's Okami's soundtrack, dude. It's the most stereotypical samurai-ass shit that you saw in some black and white samurai movie from the 60s, and it's just that sprinkled out through the whole thing. I'm sorry, that's what I heard. I don't know what you heard. That's what I heard.
I didn't like feel negatively towards the music necessarily, but none of it like stood out in the way that I think people talk about. People talk about, oh my god, Okami's soundtrack is incredible, and I don't know, man. I've heard plenty of Japanese game soundtracks. I think most of the Zelda games have some of the greatest soundtracks ever made. Mario games, some of the best soundtracks ever. Like, this didn't do it for me. It's fine. It's not offensive to me. Like, it's not like bad, but none of it stands out in a way that makes me go, oh, you know, I really want to go listen to Okami's soundtrack outside of the game. I will put on the Ocarina of Time soundtrack as background music. I will not do that for Okami.
I can hum the entirety of the Diddy Kong Racing soundtrack, dude. Like Chrono Trigger, those, like, to me, those are amazing Japanese soundtracks. Now, obviously, they're not going to, like, traditional Japanese music there, but...
Sure, of course.
But it has, to me, though, it's just, like, I don't know why people are just so into this game's music, but, like, I mean, halfway through, I'm playing with podcasts in the background, you know what I mean? Like, none of the sound in this game was remotely required for me to keep playing it. It truly did nothing to remove every bit of sound while I was playing this game.
And I know that's going to be very controversial. That might be the most controversial take that we've said so far in this game or this podcast full of controversial
I can take
takes.
the 3 YouTube comments. I can take it. That's fine.
But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I didn't like it, but I definitely just tuned it out at a certain point. I was like, yeah, whatever. It's music. It was nothing impressive to me. It's not like when I'm playing like Persona or Zelda or so many other Japanese games with great soundtracks where I'm like super invested in the music. This game just didn't do that for me. And like you said, I know it's going for a different style. It's going for a more traditional Japanese, like historical music sound. And that probably works really well for some people. And I get that, but it did not work for me.
Now, having just ranted for an hour about how much this game infuriated us, there is good here, right? I think, like, we were kind of talking about what would you give it as a final score, and the comparison I was making is like, I would give this a 7 out of 10 because it is quite literally like if a student turned this in as a paper, I'd be like, this passes, but truly as close as it can come to failing while still passing. Like, I truly think there's such a good foundation here, and there's so many cool ideas. And when the game is hitting its stride like an Oni Island, I felt like it was such an awesome game. I was like, man, the platforming's a lot of fun. It'd be cool if Zelda had more platforming like this. But man, are those moments like fleeting and few and far between. I mean, I think I did enjoy everything after Oni Island prior to the boss rush a little more than you did. I guess like that whole sprint for me was really cool. I liked it, but it still was like, I couldn't even enjoy it in a vacuum because all I was thinking as I was enjoying it was like, what the fuck was I doing the first 20 hours? Like, why was the first 20 hours so bad compared to the last 10? I don't understand. I mean, it's like, there's so much direction at the end of the game. I mean, like, narratively, I'm actually getting into some of the stuff involving like the tiny village and the girl that has to sing to get the volcanoes to erupt. Like, that was way more interesting than what was going on the first 20 hours. And the characters in Issen's little village, it's like, oh, Issen had character development at hour 25. Cool. I mean, truly, the last 10 hours just does so many things right. But it's just you can't shake the feeling of like what was going on the first 20.
Yeah, I would largely agree with that. I think I ended up with around a 6.5 out of 10 if I were to give it a number score, a little bit lower than you, which is odd. I'm usually
literally
the one who's
never
higher
happen
than you.
again. So
yeah. Like, don't ever expect that again, guys. This is a once in a lifetime thing. You're watching history here. I think the 0.5 lower that I'm giving it is that I didn't like that last dungeon, and you did. But that's probably where our 0.5 discrepancy comes in.
Yeah, that's probably exactly it.
Because I was so high on that middle section, I was coming around to it. I was like, yes, this is what I wanted from Okami. And I did like the small village. Like, I liked the tiny village. I liked a lot of the story beats around that area. Like, I liked a lot of the environments and the lore and the things that were going on. The last dungeon, though, mechanically and just like a lot of those puzzles didn't work for me, and the spider climbing was infuriating. There's a lot of things that I didn't really love in that last dungeon, and it took me down a lot. And then the boss rush really just sinks it. I literally looked at my notes when I got to the third Orochi fight, and it was just like, Orochi 3 times in all caps? Like, why?
Yeah, I'm seeing right here. It says, like, making me fight this Orochi fight, one of the most tedious and annoying in the game, 3 times is simply not okay.
Exactly. I was just so mad by fighting this stupid fight again for the 3rd time. It really does take the energy that I had from that middle section and drop it down just below what I would consider, like, right, passing.
Yeah.
Because for me, like, a 7 is average. Like, that's kind of how I look at my rating system, and that's probably weird because, like, 5 should probably be average, but, like, really, no one uses 1 to 3.
Yeah.
So, like, 7 is an average game, and for me, unfortunately, this falls just short of that. Like, there's just more that I dislike here than I do like, and I'm bummed about that. But I do have hope for Okami 2. I will still play Okami 2. And I'm still excited to see, like, what lessons were learned through the last 20 years of game development when it comes to making Okami 2.
See, I went from somewhere between kind of like an indifference and maybe a mild curiosity to I will almost certainly not play Okami 2. I don't think I'm going to.
Really?
Because, like, ultimately, I just don't. Well, here's the thing, though. You know what else I don't really care for all that much? Bayonetta or Nier Automata. So, nah.
That's fair. That's fair.
Which, honestly, I would like to pay Bayonetta for this podcast at some point. Because I do just think maybe I'm just not good at those kind of action games. And that might be the problem more than anything. But yeah, dude, there's a lot more things I kind of want to nitpick, but I feel like we've just beaten a dead horse here. I mean, like drawing the constellations. Oh God, like it should be the easiest thing in the game, and it's just like, sorry, that dot isn't close enough to be considered a star. Or like,
but sometimes it is close enough when it shouldn't be. Like, I'm definitely gonna have to redo this one. But it's like, oh no, it picked up. And it's like, what do you
so
mean?
it's supposed to be you put a dot wherever the lines end or where they bend. And sometimes the bends were so slight, I didn't even realize a star was supposed to go there until I failed 3 times, and it was like, hey, you idiot, here's where a star goes.
Right.
Blockhead.
And then that feels annoying.
That's awful. Blockhead is like that, but worse. It's like, now instead of knowing where the stars are supposed to go, they're different each time, and it's even more sensitive. I literally almost quit playing at the second Blockhead.
That last Blockhead, for some reason, was so the one that was like 7 or whatever. I just could not remember for the life of me. I'm like, I don't know. I just started like hitting buttons.
Yeah, the time I actually did it, I swear, was like the least effort I put into it. Maybe there's like a built-in failsafe that's like, all right, 15 failures in a row, just pass them. Like,
and it's stuff like that. We didn't really talk about the digging mini game either. That's just like, it's like. The game wants to like throw in so many little side activities that utilize the brush techniques. And it's like, I get it. You want to show off your main mechanic, and I understand why. But so much of it just doesn't work because the mechanic either isn't responsive or the activity isn't fun.
All of them suck. Everything that they tried to do to use the brush with outside of combat and puzzles sucks. Every minigame, every weird cinematic sequence, all of it sucks.
I'm very curious to see how they change it up for Okami 2. What they do to hopefully improve upon the like framework. Because I think the difference is a lot of the like Japanese stuff in this game didn't work for me as much as it normally does. But I still do like Japanese culture and like Japanese like themes and thematics, like and aesthetics. I like those more than you do, I think. Mm-hmm. And like, it was cool hearing, like, Orochi and Nagi and all these characters that, like, I recognize from other Japanese media, whether it's, like, anime or other video games or whatever. Like, I would recognize these characters and I'd recognize, like, oh, Ninetales. Okay, I'd think back to, like, Naruto or something, right? And I would be like, okay, I know the Japanese significance of these characters and why they're important. So that was cool to see. And I'd be interested to see what other like Japanese lore and history and mythology that Okami 2 can bring. And I think I'd be interested to see how that works in a game that I found more enjoyable.
Yeah, this game definitely supplants Witcher 3 for me as the single most overrated game that I have actually played through to completion. So, congratulations, Okami.
Dang, congrats, Okami. Well done.
The shrine. So by the scale, there was like this little button on the ground. It was like in a circle, okay? And there was a snowball nearby. And I think you have to blow the snowball onto that switch to like open up a door or something to get past the scales.
Yes. Yeah.
So right past that, you're doing the like platforming up the tower. And right past the spinny fire wheels is another button that looks exactly like that. I never touched it because I was like, okay, I'm looking for a snowball. Never really found one, kept going. Well, after I fall down the tower a couple times, I'm just like, can you just step on it? You can. And it stops those wheels from spinning. And it's like...
Yes, I do remember that.
What the fuck? Why would it be an indented circle in the ground if all I have to do is step on it? Why would it be an indented circle in the ground with a snowball next to it in the previous room if all I have to do is step on it?
Right. I think you said right here in this comment, an absolute failure in visual communication. And I think that's a lot of this game. Like, a lot of this game just does not visually communicate what you're supposed to be doing in a way that, like, makes sense or feels good.
The art style is pretty as it can be. I do find sometimes it's just a hindrance. I don't know how else to put it. Like, it just makes it harder to read when I'm trying to read from the game.
I do like the game visually for the most part, but... And maybe it's just because it's so old, it's like muddy, and maybe back in the day it wouldn't have bothered me as much because that's just what games looked like, and I would have been able to like read it better. But man, it just doesn't. A lot of times the visual communication, like you said, is hampered by the art style.
And part of it's because it's like nothing that's an enemy or evil is allowed to be bright at all in this game, and I think part of that is because they want like Amy to stand out. They want some of the good characters to stand out.
Yeah, there's definitely a very clear like dark versus light theme going on in this whole game, so that makes sense.
But it does just mean that a lot of the enemies look the same, that they blend into the background, that they're hard to see, and that's when the camera is pointed directly at them. So
yeah.
So like I guess the final thing I want to say about this is that despite all of this, I still kind of give it like a hesitant recommendation, but it's just like you have to know what you're getting into. And and I didn't, because there's just so much praise for this game. My childhood favorite gaming magazine gave it like almost all 10s. I thought I could trust them, man. And this game was just a miserable experience through half of it, and then like a fun one at times to the other half. And I'm giving it a 7 almost on like pure potential. It's like a 0 for execution and a 10 for ideas, right? It's just, I don't know, man. Like I'm not saying you shouldn't play it, but I am saying that like, be a little cautious with it and understand that the beginning is going to be slow and that the brushes will just never feel responsive. And I think if that doesn't bother you and you enjoy other parts of this game, like it could be a good time, especially when the platforming is like on, when it's really hitting. It's a lot of fun. But man, 5 of the 30 hours, I felt like I was enjoying myself.
Yeah, and I think that's really the best angle to approach it from. Is I do think this game should be played because of its legacy, right? Like I wrote like a little mini review about it, and I think that's kind of how I led off with is like I wanted to see the legacy of this game because that's what people talk about. I mean, this game has a 93 on Metacritic, I think. Like that's one of the highest Metacritic scores of any game. I think Ocarina is sitting at the top with like a 99, but like or a 98. 93 is really freaking good. And I was like, okay, this game is magical, right? People love this game to death. So I was like, I had to see it. And I think you should too, right? Like if you haven't played Okami, if you don't know anything about Okami, go play it. I mean, there's another game coming out soon. It's going to get a lot of buzz in the coming years because of the new game. And there is something here. I mean, that middle chunk of the game, I was glued to my Switch. I was locked in. I was like, this is a lot of fun. Just know that a lot of it is not going to be that. Like, there's a lot of this game that I find downright bad, actually.
Yeah, there's a lot of this game I find downright bad. And I don't think we didn't even like quite get to all of the parts of this game that suck. I mean, like, I'm sure I could dredge up more things if I wanted to. Because it's just, I mean, if we went through our text while we were both playing this game, every time we played it, we both just messaged the other one to complain about something, dude.
Right, and again, it's like I don't want to just completely shit on a game that we're both giving like a 6.5 and a 7. Like there is good stuff in here. Like there is stuff that is worth experiencing. It just comes with a lot of stuff that I wasn't expecting from the amount of praise that this game gets.
And look, I'd say the best thing about this game is it has convinced me that this year we are absolutely going to do both a Bayonetta and an Ocarina of Time episode. One, because I have to know if this guy ever figured out how to make games fun, and two, I need to know if like it's pure nostalgia or that Ocarina of Time is actually a substantially better game than this.
No, Ocarina of Time is 100% a better game than this, and I will die on that hill any day of the week.
I don't think I've played Ocarina since like Okami came out, like probably before 2006. So it's been a long, long time.
Did you secure a copy of Ocarina of Time 3D?
Not yet, but I will. I think they're like $30 on Amazon, so I'll pick one up.
Yeah, they're not super expensive. It's the best way to play Ocarina of Time, and I will gladly run through that one with you because it still holds up to me. I played it not too long ago, and it is still just fantastic to play.
Did they like put that on Switch or anything, or do you have to 3DS it?
The 3D version you have to play on 3DS. The original game is on Switch, I believe, through the like Nintendo Online if you have it.
Okay, but it doesn't have any of the like quality of life changes.
It doesn't have any of the 3D enhancements, which I think are worth it, especially for the Water Temple. The Water Temple the 3D version makes the Water Temple so much more bearable.
Okay. I always wonder if it's not fair to Okami to play but you know what? No, Okami got an HD re-release.
No, we played Okami HD.
It got a chance to correct its wrongs, and it refused.
The Okami re-release that we played, I think, was released after the Zelda one, too. If that makes it any better.
So the original game was years after Zelda. The re-release was after the Zelda re-release. There's no excuse.
Yeah, no. Ocarina of Time 3D is released in 2011. This game and Okami HD came out in 2017. No excuse.
Final thoughts on this, I guess, are just like I don't want to discourage anyone from trying this if they were interested, especially with the second one coming out. But at the same time, like, I don't want anyone to experience what I just did.
Normally, I'd say, like, you're being a little, that's a little bit of hyperbole, but I don't know if I would disagree. Like, I think there were moments of this game where I was like, this might be the least fun I've had with a video game ever.
And part of that is just because I was going to finish it for this podcast, whereas if it were any other game, I might have just stopped playing it. So that's, like, part of that. Like, I wouldn't have had the experience because I would have just not played the game anymore, whereas I had to keep going.
Also true.
So that's definitely part of it, right? And like at the end, I'm glad I did it, I guess. It's like, like you said, this game has this legacy. It feels like an important part of kind of like gaming history. It obviously is influential, and it's like got a cult following, and it's getting a sequel. So I wanted to experience it, and I'm glad I did. But it's a lot like when you and I played Witcher 1 a few years ago, where it was like,
yes,
kind of glad I experienced to kind of see like where this franchise started and where it ended up, but like don't actually know if I would recommend anyone else play this.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like, I think I'd maybe recommend Okami more than Witcher 1. It's just go in with like a certain level of expectation, because I think the highest highs of Okami I enjoyed more than like the highest highs of Witcher 1, right? Like that middle chunk of Okami is genuinely really good gaming. like I don't know how else to say that, like, for all the shit and like negativity that I've talked about Okami, that like middle 10 to 15 hour chunk between like finishing the first Orochi fight and getting to the Waku Shrine or whatever, like all of that, I was glued. I was locked in, and there were moments that I didn't like. I mean, there were little ups and downs even in that, but for the most part, I was like, this is really fun. This is the game that I was wishing the beginning was. Like, I am really, really enjoying this. It's just the beginning is really bad, and I didn't like the end.
Yeah, dude, the beginning was so hard to get into. That's I think that's like the ultimate thing I would leave someone with, is like, just expect to have to push through the beginning, because it's just not interesting. It's not fun. I don't know how else to say it.
It really isn't. Like, the first 8 hours of this game is a slog. Like, you have to just push through the first 8 hours. And, I know like a lot of like JRPGs will get that reputation of like, oh, like, you have to get through the first 10 hours and then it gets fun. But like JRPGs are like 70 hours long. So there's a lot of great game left after that. This game doesn't have that much runtime to make up for its beginning hours. Like, a third of this game is bad.
And obviously, that's subjective. People are going to play like, oh, well, if you have to play a game for 10 hours for it to get good, is it really good? Well, it's like, well, I'm sure not everyone would agree that it takes 10 hours for it to get good, obviously. And I don't think the designers were like, yes, we can wait 10 hours before we try. It's just kind of sort of ends up being what a lot of people say, is that this game has a very rough opening. And yeah, turns out I'm in agreement.
A lot of people will compare it to like Twilight Princess's opening, and those two games came out in the same year, so that makes some sense. Okami came out first, but people will compare it to Twilight Princess's opening, and Twilight Princess has a really slow opening, but at least that one felt to me like a little more cinematic and a little more thematic, and there was like more character and heart to it, I guess. I just didn't relate to much of what was going on in Okami. And so, like, I feel like the beginning of the game in Okami wants to carry you through on story and character and atmosphere and, like, get into our universe and just kind of enjoy the universe that we're building. And I just didn't.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why this podcast has been a little rambly and jumping back and forth, is because the game itself didn't really feel like it had a lot of defining boundaries and moments that I would want to organize this around. The most consistent thing was introducing mechanics I couldn't stand, so that's what we talked about for an hour. It's just, there are no interesting dungeons at the beginning of the game. Are there even dungeons at the beginning of the game? There's no interesting maps.
It's really hard to tell.
There's no interesting characters. Like, some of the other podcasts we've done, we followed the story or we followed some of the missions. Like, I didn't even know how to do that with this game because I never connected with it on that level. I really can't tell you what this game's overall story is. Like, 100-year-old Amy saved the world and now she has to do it again, but like her past self is involved and there's a bunch of useless fucking samurai that get all the credit. And there you go. That's Okami.
Right. There's like two stories this game kind of follows. Like the first 10 hours is Susanoo needs to stop Orochi again. The same thing that happened 100 years ago. We need to do that again because Orochi's back. And he's back for some reason. I don't really know. It feels very vague. But he's back. Like, it's the, like, somehow Orochi returned. Like, we're
Yes.
you know... like, he's back, and we have to stop Orochi. And then, after that happens at the 10-hour mark, it's, like, a completely new story. It's like, there's still evil out there. It's like, but why? We just stopped the evil. Now there's a bigger evil? What's the bigger evil? And, like, Waka, the freaking, like, weird French guy... keeps, like, feeding you little tidbits, and I'm like,
Why is he suddenly a blonde girl at the end? I had no idea what was happening there.
Yeah, that was weird. And then there was some stuff about, like, celestials or something at the end. It felt like Marvel. Like, there was, like, gods that had come, and, like, the arc of Yamato or Yamamoto or whatever, like, had come from the stars or whatever and brought demons with it. And I know this is probably offensive to anybody who, like, loves Okami's story, but by that point I just didn't give a shit.
Brother, we haven't talked about the final boss battle because what was it? Who was it? What the fuck was this orb? Like, I don't know.
It was like the evil deity that rules all the land or whatever. It was like, why? What are you?
I don't know why the game didn't stop after you bring the volcanoes back to save that snow village, because everything after that is a weird blur of nonsense that I could not even begin to tell you any of it.
Yeah, I didn't care for it. And even with, like, my anime background and my, like, knowledge of Japanese mythos vaguely through that anime stuff, like, none of that made sense or drew me in a way that I cared. And I'm sure there is cool stuff there if you're familiar with it. It didn't work for me.
It seems disconnected, right? In the first half hour, they're like, hey, you used to be a god. You're like, oh, that's interesting. That should come up again. And then 30 hours later, they're like, oh, yeah, so by the way, you used to be a god. And here's all the other ones.
Right.
And you're like,
and here's a bunch of other gods. And it's like, but why? What?
also, am I different than all the animals that taught me paintbrushes up to this point? Because I thought I was just one of them. But no, apparently I was actually like these weird human ghosts in this spaceship that crashed from space. Like, dude, for the birds, I don't give a shit.
You're like I kind of liked how every time you met a new animal that taught you a paintbrush, it's like, Amaterasu, the mother of us all. Like, they all have the same.
In slow text, of course.
Of course. I started skipping them about halfway through. I was like, yep, skip. Like, I don't care.
And, part of me, this is a criticism you had of me of metaphor, where it's like, okay, if we hadn't skipped some of that, would we understand it? Maybe not, but I wasn't going to do it.
I read the only stuff I really skipped was the animals teaching you brushstrokes, because I very quickly realized that didn't matter.
I skipped every slow sequence between, like, the first Orochi and maybe, like, Oni Island.
Oh, no. I mean, I read every piece of dialogue in the game. I just started to glaze over and not care about any of it. And I don't necessarily think that it's, like, bad writing or anything necessarily. It didn't hook me. The story, nothing about the world or the characters of the story really gripped me. And that's surprising for me, because I'm typically very into the Japanese mythology and, like, Japanese media and content. Like, I'm usually really into that stuff. But for whatever reason, the way it was done in Okami just did not grip me.
I think it got too complicated, personally. It's like trying to do too much. What is Zelda, dude? Save the world, get the girl. There you go. Do the 7 elemental thematic things in the process of saving the world and getting the girl. There you go.
But it's told with such, like, a heart and a passion to it.
And facial expressions.
In its simplicity. Yeah, the facial expressions, man.
There's a moment in Ocarina of Time where you're leaving the Deku Forest for the first time. And it's like right before you get to the, entering Hyrule Field for the first time, which is this amazing thing. But you're like, Link's going to leave the village without telling anyone. But Saria, or whatever her name is, stops him. She's like, oh yeah, you're leaving, aren't you? And like the sad music starts. And there's just this look on her face of, like, pure despair, but also, like, she understands why he has to leave. And he's a silent protagonist, obviously, but he also leaves in this way where it's like the music cuts and he takes 2 short steps back and then he just sprints away. And she is like looking at him as he fades into the distance. And there is more emotion and more visual storytelling in this one scene than Okami manages in 30 damn hours. Like, again, outside of a couple moments where I think Okami does a decent job of this. But, like, I just, there's all these moments in my head of Ocarina of Time, a game I haven't played since I was a teenager, that I can still remember so vividly. And they just, nothing in Okami for being like the point of reference that Ocarina always is for Okami, just nothing in this game hits those moments. And I don't understand why people would argue that they do. To me, they don't come anywhere close.
I was going to say, like, it is a little unfair to compare Okami to what I would consider maybe the greatest game ever made. But that's what everybody else does. So why
including the creator of the
like,
game. So that's why I don't feel bad. Like,
yeah. Also true. And I'm with you. I don't think anything hits even a fraction of the great moments in Ocarina of Time. Like, even Oni Island, which I've praised endlessly throughout this podcast, saying it's one of the best. It is the best dungeon in the game, in my opinion, and probably the best moment in the game. Still doesn't even really hit like some of the weaker dungeons in Ocarina for me. Like, and I think that's maybe the biggest takeaway is like people will compare this game to the best of Zelda, and I don't even know if it gets to the worst of Zelda.
This game vaguely resembles the worst of Zelda. That's the best I'll give it.
Yeah, and maybe it shouldn't, right? Maybe it shouldn't be compared to Zelda as endlessly as it is. I do see some of the similarities. It is going for a more action approach than Zelda. Like, the combat in this is, despite being fairly simplistic still, it is a lot more complicated than your standard Zelda combat. Like, there is definitely a more action focus on it. But the puzzles, the dungeons, like, none of that shit even comes close to even some of the weakest of Zelda stuff, in my opinion.
Well, and I guess that's what's frustrating, is because I want to try to focus on some of the things that it does do to set itself apart from Zelda, but all of those things suck. So, I mean, not all of them, right? Like I said, I think when the platforming is like hitting, it's really good. But the first third of the game doesn't really even have any of that. Like, I feel like they forgot that they're a 3D platformer until you hit Oni Island. And then it's like, oh yeah, look at all this fun stuff you can do with the double jump and the dash, and here's some obstacle courses for you, and here's like some timed sequences. And before that, it's just like solving puzzles Zelda style with hardly any platforming. It seems like such a waste through the first half of the game.
Yeah, and I do think the best moments of combat later in the game are pretty fun. Like, I do think I can see the beginnings of like where Bayonetta and your Automata and all these other games that have come later from Kamiya, like, I can see the seed of them later in the game. But I just think combat takes so long to get good that it makes the end that is, I think, relatively fun, especially like when you have the rosary beads and the sword, and like you can do the charge attacks, and like there is some cool mechanic stuff there, and like you can like slow down time, and then all the enemies are going really slow, so you can just like wail on them. Like, those things are cool, and it makes combat more interesting and engaging, but it just doesn't come into play until way too late.
Yeah, it's just like, by the time this game is fun, I just never would have gotten that far if not for this podcast, I think. And that might just be like the most final and damning thing I can say about it is if not for trying to make an episode that I set a deadline for, in which another person relied on me and I committed to, I would have never gotten through this game.
That is a pretty damning criticism. I do think it's worth a play. I do think it's worth just to try it out and give yourself, like, I know this is kind of hard to recommend to people, but like, give yourself 15 hours.
Right.
And if by hour 15, like, you still just don't see any value in it, you can probably stop, because it's not going to get much better.
If you don't enjoy the ghost ship, just uninstall it, because you're not going to like anything after that anymore.
I would be really curious to go back and play other games from this era, like 2004 to 2008, and just like see, are other games like this too? Like was this like, am I looking back at this in a way where it's like other games at the time were doing the same thing, and this one did it so much better than all of those? Like, am I being deceived, right? Am I being deceived by modern game design and just assuming that like games are better than this? Or were games back in 2006 just like this? I don't know.
maybe we're just wrong and we're so biased against this game. But like, I don't know what else to say. It's just,
I do think there is some good here. There's potential. There's stuff in here that is worth playing. Oni Island is fantastic. It is some of the most fun I've had playing a game in like a long time. Yeah. Like it is, that one little section is genuinely very fun. But so much of the stuff around it is just not enjoyable, and it makes it really hard to like talk about this game in an unbiased way because so much of it was just not fun for me. And so the fun moments don't stick out enough because so much other stuff was not.
Yeah, and I'm always worried that I'm being kind of like contrarian, and like, oh, if someone else just spends 10 years talking about how good something is that like affecting how I'm going to perceive it? And maybe that happened, maybe it didn't, but this was not a like even experience for me.
Well, I mean, I think you know me enough by this point, right? I mean, we've known each other since I was born. I think you would know that I am the popular opinion guy. Like,
that's true.
I like stuff that people like. I very rarely go against the grain.
I couldn't get you to say one negative thing about Tears of the Kingdom, which is the second most miserable gaming experience I've ever had. So.
I love that game. I like things that people like. I like the mainstream popular thing. I am the guy who always likes the stuff that people like. So when I went into Okami, I was 100% expecting to love this game. So to come out of it like this is crazy for me. I like the popular thing.
I was surprised you didn't like it as much as you did, for sure.
Yeah, like I am always the guy who likes things. I like everything. It's so hard for me to talk negatively about stuff, but so much of this game just didn't work for me. And that's so sad for me because I wanted to like this game. I went into it very excited to love this game because it's been one that's been in the backlog. It's been one that's been like, oh man, I can't wait to play this. I can't wait for people to be able to talk to people about how much I love this game because everybody else loves this game. So surely I too will love this game. And I just did.
Yeah, and if this is somehow your first episode that you're listening to us on, one, welcome, thank you. But two, like,
yeah, hi.
We don't, like, this isn't how we do things. We don't grab games that we think we're going to hate. Like, we either grab ones that we know that we love because we want to do an episode about it, or that we're curious about and other people have hyped up, right? Like, that's what this game was. Like, by no means did we think to ourselves, oh, yeah, I can't wait to get, like, 2 hours of rage content out of Okami. I think we both genuinely really expected to like this, and it just didn't quite come together.
Yeah, I never want to be that, like rage bait podcasty, like, oh, I just want to shit on the things that people like all the time. I don't want to be that guy because I'm not that guy in general in real life. Like, I like almost everything. Like, I saw Captain America this weekend and I thought it was pretty good. Everybody else seems to hate it. So like, I like things. I unfortunately didn't like this.
Well, that about wraps up our endless rants on 2006's cult classic Okami.
As always, you can find this and other Games Gone By episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcasting platform. And you can follow us on Blue Sky and YouTube at the Games Gone By podcast.
Signing off for Games Gone By, I'm Adam.
I'm Austin.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next time.